Let's get into it. Coach Colin here. Everybody knows, if you don't know, RFK has endorsed Trump for president and he has dropped out of the presidential race, although he says he's only suspending his campaign, and there's a reason for that. Now, a lot of people like to just grab the soundbite. I'm sure you've seen the posts on Instagram and whatnot, and it just says RFK endorsed Trump, and that's all that matters. But I always like to go to the soundbite, find the full video, see the full talk or speech or interview, and really find what people are leaving on the table. And I think there's quite a bit when it comes to this speech. I have to say, it was very noble what he did. It was very genuine, and it was very presidential, the speech that he gave. And I went through the whole thing, and this is what I'm going to be showing you, a couple of highlights here. It's going to be him announcing the dropout. Then we're going to move on to the actual endorsement for Trump. And then we're going to move on to Trump's offer. That's going to be the last part. Trump's offer and Harris's offer or lack thereof. You know, the Biden campaign, the Harris campaign, the entire Democratic Party has been absolutely gross in regards to RFK. You know, I always have my biases. I want to see Trump as president, but the way that he has been treated is absolutely atrocious, very similar to Trump. So let's get into what we've seen here develop. And congratulations to Trump. And honestly, in a way, congratulations to RFK as well. Let's get into this.
Many months ago, I promised the American people that I would withdraw from the race if I became a spoiler. A spoiler is someone who will alter the outcome of the election but has no chance of winning. In my heart, I no longer believe that I have a realistic path to electoral victory in the face of this relentless systematic censorship and media control. So I cannot in good conscience ask my staff and volunteers to keep working their long hours or ask my donors to keep giving when I cannot honestly tell them that I have a real path to the White House. Furthermore, our polling consistently showed that by staying on the ballot in the battleground states, I would likely hand the election over to the Democrats with whom I disagree on the most existential issues: censorship, war, and chronic disease. Oh, I want everyone to know that I am not terminating my campaign. I am simply suspending it and not ending it. My name will remain on the ballot in most states. If you live in a blue state, you can vote for me without harming or helping President Trump or Vice President Harris. In red states, the same will apply. I encourage you to vote for me. And if enough of you do vote for me, and neither of the major party candidates win 270 votes, which is quite possible, in fact, today our polling shows them tying at 269 to 269, and I could conceivably still end up in the White House in a contingent election. But in about 10 battleground states where my presence would be a spoiler, I'm going to remove my name, and I've already started that process and urge voters not to vote for me. It's with a sense of victory and not defeat that I'm suspending my campaign activities. Not only did we do the impossible by collecting 1 million signatures, we changed the national political conversation forever. Chronic disease, free speech, government corruption, breaking our addiction to war have moved to the center of politics. I can say to all who have worked so hard for the last year and a half, thank you for a job well done. 3 great causes drove me to enter this race in the first place, primarily. And these are the principal causes that persuaded me to leave the Democratic Party and run as an independent. And now to throw my support to President Trump. The causes were free speech, the war in Ukraine, and the war on our children. I've already described some of my personal experiences and struggles with the government's censorship industrial complex. I want to say a word about the Ukraine war. The military-industrial complex has provided us with a familiar comic book justification, like they do on every war, that this one is a noble effort to stop a supervillain, Vladimir Putin, from invading the Ukraine and then to thwart his Hitler-like march across Europe. In fact, tiny Ukraine is a proxy in a geopolitical struggle initiated by the ambitions of the U.S. neocons for American global hegemony. I'm not excusing Putin for invading Ukraine. He had other options. But the war is Russia's predictable response to the reckless neocon project of extending NATO to encircle Russia.
Now, I'm just trying to bring highlights. I'm not trying to play the whole thing. I let that run a little long because I do want to bring up the fact that, you know, that last point that he just made, right? That was Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was, out of the very few times where she would actually make herself known and speak on things, that was one of the things that she actually spoke up about. Making Ukraine part of NATO, the red line for Russia. You know, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, she's completely responsible for what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, but she pretty much announced the thing that Putin was like, do not announce this. Do not say this. Do not try this. And she was like, we're going to make Ukraine a part of NATO. And Putin was like, who is this who is this lady? He's like, why is the president of India speaking for the United States? Kenny, of course, she couldn't become president of India. We all know that. They would never elect her. How about that? Anyway, moving on to the next thing, which is the solid endorsement of Trump. And then we will move on to the last thing, which, ooh, geez. We'll move on to the last thing, which I found so gross. But let's get into it.
And to support President Trump, this decision is agonizing for me because of the difficulties it causes my wife and my children and my friends. But I have the certainty that this is what I've meant to do. And that certainty gives me internal peace, even in storms. If I'm given the chance to fix the chronic disease crisis and reform our food production, I promise that within 2 years, we will watch chronic disease burden lift dramatically. We will make Americans healthy again. Within 4 years, America will be a healthy country. We will be stronger, more resilient, more optimistic, and happier. I won't fail in doing this. Ultimately, the future, however it happens, is in God's hands and in the hands of the American voters and those of President Trump. If President Trump is elected and honors his word, the vast burden of chronic disease that now demoralizes and bankrupts the country will disappear. This is a spiritual journey for me. I reached my decision through deep prayer, through hard-nosed logic, and I asked myself, what choices must I make to maximize my chances to save America's children and restore national health? I felt that if I refused this opportunity, I would not be able to look myself in the mirror, knowing that I could have saved lives of countless children and reversed this country's chronic disease epidemic. I'm 70 years old. I may have a decade to be effective. I can't imagine that President Harris would allow me or anyone to solve these dire problems. After 8 years of President Harris, any opportunity for me to fix the problem will be out of my reach forever. President Trump has told me that he wants this to be his legacy. I'm choosing to believe that this time he will follow through. His son, his biggest donors, his closest friends, and all support this objective. My joining the Trump campaign will be a difficult sacrifice for my wife and children, but worthwhile if there's even a small chance of saving these kids. Ultimately, the only thing that will save our country and our children is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other. That's why I launched my campaign to unify America. My dad and uncle made such an enduring mark on the character of our nation, not so much because of any particular policies that they promoted, but because they were able to inspire profound love for our country and to fortify our sense of ourselves as a national community held together by ideals. They were able to put their love into the intentions and hearts of ordinary Americans and to unify a national populist movement of Americans, blacks and whites, Hispanics, urban and rural Americans. They inspired affection and love and high hopes and a culture of kindness that continue to radiate among Americans from their memory. That's the spirit on which I ran my campaign and that I intend to bring into the campaign of President Trump. Instead of vitriol and polarization, I will appeal to the values that unite us, the goals that we could achieve if only we weren't at each other's throats. The most unifying theme for all Americans is that we all love our children. If we all unite around that issue now, we can finally give them the protection, the health, and the future that they deserve. Thank you all very much.
Man, solid speech. I got another clip after this, but I just did it in a different way. I just wanted to sum it all up. But wow, like solid speech, very Kennedy-like speech, very noble cause. And if you don't know what he's talking about, there is a conversation that was leaked between Trump and RFK after Trump was the attempt on his life. Now, what Trump was talking about in this conversation, he was saying, it's crazy what's going on with the kids. He's like, and it would be really big for you. And that's where they had the conversation about Trump wanting it to be his legacy, about RFK possibly stepping into this position and really dealing with the chronic diseases, because Trump was touching on something that we can't talk about on here, but he was crazy. He was talking about how it was crazy how kids used to receive X amount of a thing, and now they receive way more of those things, if you know what I mean. And Trump was saying how crazy it was. RFK was agreeing. And this was supposed to happen when Trump first ran for president. I'm going to get over to that next clip in a second. Just want to give you some context here. That was supposed to happen the first time. Now, the word is, and obviously I'm not going to be able to get a quote from Bill Gates or from Trump or anybody really, but it's said that Bill Gates ended up stopping somehow. Not sure. I don't really understand this part, but the word was from my research that somehow Bill Gates stopped this committee from forming that RFK was supposed to be the chief of. Somehow. I don't know how that happened. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's just what I'm just bringing you the information I got. So it never happened. And that's what that's what RFK means by, I hope Trump follows through this time, because it was supposed to happen before. Now Trump's saying it's his legacy, the chronic disease that's going on within children. And yeah, we'll see. So there's a path for RFK to really make for him to be so acknowledging of his mortality, and to say, what's more important, saving these lives or staying in the race and fighting like hell and possibly getting a third party going and all of that, or making the impact that he can now. Can you imagine Vivek, RFK, Trump, and oh my God, all in a cabinet? Oh my gosh. Listen, let's go through this last clip. It's a bit of a shorter one, but he's just talking about Harris and what she was willing or not willing to do in regards to RFK. Listen to this.
Military adventures. And President Trump says that he will reopen negotiations with President Putin and end the war overnight as soon as he becomes president. This alone would justify my support for his campaign. Last summer, it looked like no candidate was willing to negotiate a quick end to the Ukraine war, to tackle chronic disease epidemic, to protect free speech, our constitutional freedoms, to clean corporate influence out of our government, or to defy the neocons and their agenda of endless military adventurism. But now one of the two candidates has adopted these issues as his own, to the point where he has asked to enlist me in his administration. I'm speaking, of course, of Donald Trump. Less than 2 hours after President Trump narrowly escaped assassination, Callie Means called me on my cell phone. I was then in Las Vegas. Callie is arguably the leading advocate for food safety, for soil regeneration, and for ending the chronic disease epidemic that is destroying America's health and ruining our economy. Callie has exposed the insidious corruption at the FDA, the NIH, the HHS, and the USDA that has caused the epidemic. Callie had been working on and off for my campaign, advising me on those subjects since the beginning. And those subjects have been my primary focus for the last 20 years. I was delighted when Callie told me that day that he had also been advising President Trump. He told me President Trump was anxious to talk to me about chronic disease and other subjects, and to explore avenues of cooperation. He asked if I would take a call from the president. President Trump telephoned me a few minutes later, and I met with him the following day. A few weeks later, I met again with President Trump and his family members and closest advisors in Florida. In a series of long, intense discussions, I was surprised to discover that we are aligned on many key issues. In those meetings, he suggested that we join forces as a unity party. We talked about Abraham Lincoln's team of rivals. That arrangement would allow us to disagree publicly and privately, and fiercely, if need be, on issues over which we differ, while working together on the existential issues upon which we are in concordance. I was a ferocious critic of many of the policies during his first administration, and there are still issues and approaches upon which we continue to have very serious differences. But we are aligned with each other on other key issues, like ending the forever wars, ending the childhood disease epidemics, securing the border, protecting freedom of speech, unraveling the corporate capture of our regulatory agencies, getting the U.S. intelligence agencies out of the business of propagandizing and censoring and surveilling Americans and interfering with our elections. Following my first discussion with President Trump, I tried unsuccessfully to open similar discussions with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris declined to meet or even to speak with me. Suspending my candidacy is a heart-rending decision for me, but I'm convinced that it's the best hope for ending the Ukraine war and ending the chronic disease epidemic that is eroding our nation's vitality from the inside, and for finally protecting free speech. I feel a moral obligation to use this opportunity to save millions of American children, above all things. In case some of you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general, I would urge you to view Dr. Carlson's recent interview with Callie Means and his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who is the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School. This is an issue that affects all of us far more directly and urgently than any culture war issue, and all the other issues that we obsess on and that are tearing apart our country. This is the most important issue. Therefore, it has the potential to bring us together. So let me share a little bit about why I believe it's so urgent. Today, two-thirds, we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of any nation in the world. We're about 79th in health outcomes behind Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Mongolia and other countries. Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. And during the COVID epidemic, we had the
Man, I let that run a little long, but I just wanted to show all that. But the main thing throughout that clip was the fact that he had these lengthy conversations with Trump, where they were really tackling issues, really trying to connect and see where they align. And when he tried to do the same thing with Harris, she refused to speak to him or meet with him. It is so crazy, and very much like when he's talking about the Ukraine war as well. Biden, this entire time, I think his entire presidency, or at least since the whole thing between Russia and Ukraine started, he has not communicated with Vladimir Putin once. Kamala Harris has not communicated with Vladimir Putin once. It's not even a question of whether or not he's willing to negotiate. They haven't contacted him to negotiate. It's very interesting. Everything RFK is talking about in this speech is very pro-human and very pro-America. And everything that you've seen, the Biden and now the Harris, well, I shouldn't say now the Harris administration, it's still the Biden administration, but everything that you see with these Dems is very anti-human. I mean, right down to at their convention, they had a bus that was giving out free vasectomies and free abortions. And they were celebrating the fact that they did 10 abortions. It's so unhinged, so calmly unhinged, the way that they operate, so calmly anti-human. It's so gross. Not willing to negotiate on a war that's killing thousands of people, not willing to actually speak to a man who wants to see less Americans die from chronic disease, children, in fact. It's weird. It's weird. To quote the entire Kamala Harris campaign, what the whole thing they're running on, it's weird, man. But it's a 48-minute, 25-second speech. I really do encourage you to go and watch the entire thing. I was bringing you the highlights because this is the main stuff that people want to focus on. I thought the fact that Harris didn't want to speak with RFK at all was actually very telling. So I wanted to make sure to add that as well and let RFK talk about everything that his main focus is, which is chronic disease and, just overall health in Americans. And yeah, I really hope he gets to do this. I really hope he does this. I was talking with one of my friends. We were talking about this while I was getting ready to make the video, and he's not quite a fan of JD Vance, and he was like, it would be amazing if Trump dropped JD Vance. Like brought JD Vance to another place in the administration and put RFK in as VP. That would be insane. That would be landslide victory. Landslide victory, easy. Landslide victory, and also landslide victory for America those 4 years that they're both in office together. It would be wild. And obviously this is not a thing that's going to happen. I mean, if it does, I don't even know, man. I don't even know what I would say if that happened, but very interesting stuff. And, he is very aware of his mortality, but, Trump is what, 78? Biden is 154. So maybe after these 4 years, he runs again and we see where that puts him. I don't know. But, I don't agree with I don't agree with a bunch of stuff that he thinks about. But just hearing him talk about all this, very presidential, very noble, very genuine, and doing the right thing, really doing the right thing. He could have went the way of his entire family and just endorsed Kamala Harris and just embraced Biden, Harris, and all that. He could have easily done that. But instead, he's doing the very hard thing, endorsing Trump. We can only, it's so expected. We're going to see a bunch of attacks now on RFK. We've already been seeing it through the past weeks, probably because the mainstream media and their operatives got wind of what RFK is doing today. They probably got wind of that like a few weeks ago, because there's probably some talkings within the Trump campaign. People probably knew that RFK and Trump met up and had some lengthy conversations, and, they were probably scared. That's why you've been seeing a couple of smear pieces on RFK, like, oh, he was eating a dog. He was eating a dog. I saw it. It's just nonsensical things that really don't matter. But yeah, that's everything there. Let me know what you guys think about this whole thing. And again, this is something I would watch this in full. I've watched this in full twice already. It's a great speech, man. Really great speech. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. It helps the channel tremendously. And other than that, I'm out.